Today is October 28, 2025. I have been absent maybe about 2 weeks since my last video. I have been posting almost every single day, but in terms of videos, this will be my first video in 2 weeks. I also relatively recently published a new article that I had not been able to read to my audience. It is this one. It's from October 21st, 2025. Future Global Order Pivots on Ukraine Proxy War. And this is specifically about not just the conflict in Ukraine, but specifically the ongoing conflict in Pokrovsk. And I want to show you the live map. This is liveuamap.com. This is a pro-Ukrainian live map. It is the visual representation of the Ukrainian General Staff and therefore the U.S. generals and the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency actually running the war on the ground and from their command center in Germany. This is what they say is going on, but of course this is always much more optimistic in favor of Ukraine and less so in favor of Russia. But even still, you can see just how much trouble Ukraine is in. Now let's look at the map. This is all of Ukraine. All of this in red is territory Russia has taken since the special military operation began, save for Crimea, which rejoined the Russian Federation in 2014. And if we look along the line of contact, again, all of these red rifle icons, this is Ukrainian General Staff admitting Russian forces on the offensive. These flag icons, this means Russia is taking this territory. And all along the line of contact in the Donbas region, we are seeing, I would say, accelerating Russian advances. They're always accelerating, but now it is happening exponentially. It is happening faster and faster to where almost day to day now you will notice a difference, whereas it could have been a week to week matter maybe a couple of months ago, and then maybe a month to month matter before that. It is accelerating exponentially. And this is because, and as I've explained many times over the last 3 to 4 years now, Russia is waging a war of attrition. It is grinding down Ukraine's fighting capacity, its trained manpower, and its material support from all of the collective West. All of that is being ground down faster than it can be replaced. Trained manpower more than anything else. There's no way for Ukraine to replace this. Save for Europe to introduce its own troops into this conflict, and that, of course, would be only a stopgap. I don't believe they have enough trained manpower and would be able to sustain the losses they would face in a conflict with Russia long enough. They think the trick is getting European troops to cross into Ukraine, hoping that Russia will stop short of fighting NATO directly. I think that is the plan. This is what I've been talking about for weeks, if not months now. Now let's look at Pokrovsk. Just a month ago, and if you look here, there is a timeline feature, and we'll go back to October 1st to see where this all was on October 1st. But this is Pokrovsk, and this is Ukraine's General Staff admitting that Russian forces are in the main city. They are in the central areas of the main city of Pokrovsk, and you see these two pincers, they are getting closer and closer. This is almost an actual physical encirclement now of this pocket. And the reason why this is so important is because with Pokrovsk gone, Russian forces are going to be able to develop this area further. And what remains of Ukraine's heavily defended, what they call defensive belt, is Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, these two main cities, and then the surrounding areas. That's it. That's all that's left. And if Russia were to take all of this, they would have the entire Donbas region. That would be a major achievement for Russia. That's one of their main objectives of launching the special military operation in the first place, is to take over the entire Donbas region. And these are all extremely heavily fortified areas that have been built up over years, not just the last 3 to 4 years of the special military operation, but since 2014, since this whole conflict began following the U.S. overthrow of the Ukrainian government all the way back in 2014. And then Russian forces would be able to continue moving into Kharkov, into Zaporozhye, even into Sumy in the north. And what is threatening to happen here is a Russian push all the way to the Dnieper River and taking all of this territory permanently, irreversibly. There are even talks of Russian forces moving on the opposite bank of the Dnieper River into Kherson again. There are increased strikes on Nikolaev and also Odessa. And these are all areas that Russia has now in its sight. And that would cut whatever is left of Ukraine off from the Black Sea. And so this is a very pivotal moment right now in Pokrovsk. There's also Kupiansk up in, actually, we should look at that also. Kupiansk, again, shows almost all of Kupiansk, a good half of it now, the central part of the city taken by Russian forces. This is a pro-Ukrainian map showing this. So this is what is happening on the battlefield. This is the war of attrition, Russia constantly building up its fighting capacity while constantly grinding down Ukraine's fighting capacity. This was never about taking territory. This was about grinding Ukrainian forces down until there is a general collapse. And then Russia doesn't have to fight for every single inch of territory it takes after that. So let me read this article from about a week ago. And let's see how things have turned out since then. Russian forces in recent weeks have been increasingly encircling the cities of Pokrovsk in central Donetsk, while approaching Lyman and Seversk further to the north. Actually, it's important for you to know where that is also. Okay, so we're just talking about Pokrovsk here. We're talking about Kramatorsk and Slavyansk here. Here is Seversk, and here is Lyman. And what is happening is you have Russian forces coming down from the north and Russian forces pushing up from the south. And what a lot of people are thinking is going to happen is some sort of encirclement like this. I don't think that is going to happen, a physical encirclement. I will talk about that in this article. It'll be more of an operational encirclement, which can be just as effective in some cases, especially when you're running out of manpower, weapons, and ammunition. Looking at various live mapping projects tracking the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, nascent pincers appear to be emerging in what some analysts believe could be a large-scale encirclement of what remains of Ukraine's fortress belt in the Donbas region, comprising a number of heavily defended, built-up urban centers from Konstantinovka and extending northward toward Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, closer to Lyman. Ukraine's remaining fortress belt likely comprises thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of Ukrainian forces. Their encirclement by Russian forces would deal a catastrophic defeat to Ukraine and its US sponsors and signify the achievement of a major Russian objective amid its ongoing special military operation, the full capture of the Donbas region. Over the next weeks and months, the fate of this military operation will be decided both on the battlefield in the Donbas region, far beyond it, in the strategic depths of both Ukraine and Russia, as well as geopolitically worldwide. So we have to remember, this is not a conflict between Ukraine and Russia. This is a US war against Russia being waged through Ukraine, and it is just one part of a much larger global geopolitical objective of the US to maintain hegemony over the entire planet, to prevent a re-emerging Russia and to stop a rising China. This conflict in Ukraine is directly linked to absolutely everything the US is doing in the Asia Pacific vis-a-vis China. And so for people who are hallucinating some sort of US-China peace, or that the US is retreating from China, or that it's going to prioritize its conflict in Russia and just neglect the conflict it is brewing with China, this is delusional. It is all part of one single agenda. They are all connected. It's not one or the other. It's all or nothing. This is how it's seen in decades of policy papers. This is what the US is openly, demonstratively, materially doing right now. While many imagine a World War II-style physical encirclement of Ukraine's fortress belt by rolling columns of Russian armor and infantry units, the encirclement will much more likely take the form of an operational rather than physical envelopment. Russian ground forces will continue their incremental advance along the line of contact, approaching Ukrainian-held towns and cities, besieging them, and eventually taking them, ensuring salients that emerge are well protected from Ukrainian counterattack, as well as from the sort of operational envelopment Russia itself has been and seeks to continue to impose on Ukrainian forces. So as Russian forces push past the line of contact, there are these salients that emerge. I will show you something like this right here. And now you see, you're pushing out, you have enemy forces on 3 sides. And now you are vulnerable to counterattack, and you are vulnerable to being cut off logistically yourself. And so what Russia has to do is ensure that as they push out, they secure their flanks, and they prevent counterattacks, and they prevent themselves from being cut off logistically. And so that is why they have been moving so slowly and incrementally along the line of contact. It's not, and again, it's not because they're trying to and failing to take territory. They're just grinding down Ukrainian forces. As they collapse, they will fill in the void. And they want to do it slowly and carefully to avoid overextending themselves in the process. Instead, Russian long-range warfare capabilities, and drone warfare in particular, which has evolved rapidly in terms of both quality and quantity, will be able to target Ukraine's line of communications along the entire rear of the remaining fortress belt. With the inevitable fall of Pokrovsk to Russian forces in central Donetsk and Russian forces approaching Lyman in the north, Russian first-person view FPV drones and fiber-optic drones will be in range of virtually everything in between. So again, let's look back at the map here. If you measure the distance from here, like around Lyman, and this area right here, if you measure the distance between here, and you check the ranges of Russian FPV and fiber optic drones, they could launch drones from either direction and they will be able to meet in the middle. And if you are able to do that, then you are able to complicate the line of communications along the entire rear of this area of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk and everything around it and in between. And we already see, and this is Western media, the war zone, very pro-Ukraine, pro-Western. Russian fiber optic drones are now reaching into Ukrainian cities deep behind the lines. The strike on Kramatorsk, so they're talking about the city of Kramatorsk that I was just showing you on the map, is a harbinger of what's to come as these highly resilient drones extend their range, expand their range. And so they're expanding their range, they're also expanding in terms of quantity. And this is going to allow Russia to further complicate the logistics of larger and larger areas. That is exactly what we see happening. This is how this conflict is going to develop in the next weeks and several months. The encirclement of Pokrovsk and the emerging salient extending north, reaching almost directly west of Konstantinovka, has already compromised logistics for Konstantinovka itself. As Russian forces consolidate control in this region, drone operations targeting logistics for Kramatorsk and Slavyansk will become increasingly effective together with Russian forces doing likewise while moving from the north to south from Lyman and Seversk. The closer these pincers get to one another, the more effective operational encirclements will become, and the more precarious Ukrainian positions will become in between them. Just as Pokrovsk itself does not require complete physical encirclement by Russian forces to severely compromise Ukrainian logistics and thus undermine defensive positions inside the city, Russia does not necessarily need to physically encircle the Kramatorsk-Slavyansk section of Ukraine's fortress belt to severely compromise both logistics for it and military positions within it. And already this is happening right now, even before the fall of Pokrovsk. In some ways, an operational encirclement would be preferable to a physical envelopment. Because Russia is fighting what is essentially a war of attrition, seeking to demilitarize Ukraine rather than focusing on the rapid seizure of territory, it seeks to force Ukraine to commit huge amounts of reserves to Pokrovsk and elsewhere along the fortress belt to meet well-established Russian military positions and long-range fires. When you set up your forces into firing positions and you scope out all of the distances and you work out with drone operators, spotting targets, hitting targets. Once you get all of that into a well-coordinated cohesive unit. When you move it forward, then you have to calibrate everything all over again. So if you have your line set up, and if you can, you bring the enemy to you and you grind them down. That is ideal. Every time you move forward, you have to recalibrate everything. A rapid Russian advance toward the Dnieper River or beyond would be costly and would afford what remains of Ukraine's forces the ability to operate closer and closer to their own base of material support along its border with NATO. Instead, Ukraine is forced to continuously send troops and material to the current line of contact where Russia is destroying it. If you look at a map, you look at the line of contact here. I mean, this is Russia, and this is how far Russia has to go to reach the line of contact. This is how far Ukraine has to send everything to reach the line of contact. And so you can see the problem here. Just another problem for Ukraine and its Western sponsors to face in this ongoing conflict. The Western media now accepts that Russia is both fighting and decisively winning this war of attrition, that there is little the US and its European client states can do to stop it, at least in terms of continued military support for Ukrainian forces. This is why the US and Europe have insisted on a ceasefire and what would essentially be a Minsk 3.0 freeze, during which the collective West would expand its own military-industrial production and, just like during the first Minsk agreements, rebuild Ukraine's armed forces for the next round of hostilities. Russia knows this, and they find it unacceptable. They will not accept a ceasefire. They will continue fighting. They want a diplomatic solution to this, but that means the US admitting why it started this war in the first place and dismantling the network that it has created, the military network it has created all across Europe, all along Russia's borders, to encircle, contain, and threaten Russia itself. The US will never do this. I think Russia understands that. That is why they're determined to solve this problem, this conflict on the battlefield in Ukraine. Russia's rejection of a ceasefire and continued successful military operation inside Ukraine has forced the US to both escalate on the battlefield and turn towards means beyond the battlefield in Ukraine to force a freeze, or short of that, raise the cost as high as possible for Russia to continue its SMO. One option has been the threat of sending Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. Even though they said that they're not going to do this, at least not for now, they didn't talk about this for absolutely no reason at all. This is something, as they always do, they put it out there, they get people used to the idea. At first it's shocking, but the longer that it lingers, the more permissible it becomes for them to eventually implement this as an option. And this is what they have done with so many other weapon systems as well that at first seemed unthinkable, but are now routinely used on the battlefield. Not a war-winning capability in and of itself, its introduction would once again incrementally increase the cost of continuing the conflict for Russia, forcing it to reorganize its air defenses to defend deeper inside Russian territory, and possibly slowing down the progress of operations along the front line. The missiles could also perhaps strike at and inflict larger scale damage on Russian military, industrial, and energy production infrastructure than ongoing US-directed drone and missile strikes already are. And I've talked about this in a previous video, and you remember the Financial Times report. This is a Reuters article citing it. US intelligence helps Ukraine target Russian energy infrastructure. It is actually a US CIA operation, and it's just being, again, like everything else, being carried out through Ukraine for a degree of separation for the US to prevent this from just being an outright US-Russian conflict. The point of striking Russian energy production facilities is to try to inflict serious damage on the Russian economy. And we're hearing two different stories. We hear the Western media saying it's crippling Russia's economy, Russia saying it's not doing anything, but then maybe after a week or so they admit, okay, maybe it's doing a little bit of damage. And so the truth is probably somewhere in between. It's probably not causing catastrophic economic damage, but I highly doubt that it's causing no damage at all. It probably is significantly raising the cost for Russia to continue this. However, we have to remember that for Russia, this is an existential struggle that they're involved in. The US is encircling and trying to contain and subordinate Russia, eliminate it so that it can fully focus all of its resources on a rising China. That is what is really happening right now. This is what Russia understands is happening. This is what they're responding to. Together with this escalation on the battlefield, the US has also threatened a range of sanctions and tariffs aims both at Russia itself as well as its closest trading partners, especially India and China. And again, we heard that India and China, there's no way they would cut back on Russian oil. But now the US has placed these sanctions on Russian oil companies, and it looks like at least some companies in China, in India, are cutting back. Is that it? Is that final? Are these companies simply going to find a way around these sanctions? They're just doing this in the interim, and that they will find ways around that. That all remains to be seen. China also understands that this is existential for them. So I think for certain they will find a way around the sanctions. India is the weakest link in all of this. And analysts have to watch India extremely carefully. It is not a single homogenous state. There are many competing factions within India, politically, economically. The US has tremendous influence over some of them, others not so much. And so this is going to be a game of influence. And unfortunately, the US still holds almost a monopoly on geopolitical influence in that realm. These threats are aimed at forcing India and China, ideally both, to choose access to US markets and its US dollar-dominated global financial system over trade with Russia, thus isolating Russia and making it infinitely more difficult for Russia to continue its military operations in Ukraine. Should India and China cave to US demands and Russia find itself isolated or even collapse economically and politically, this would further isolate both India and China themselves, a key component of US strategic sequencing and its ultimate objective of preventing all rivals, ally or adversary, from rising to prominence. This is the reality of US foreign policy, past and present. US strategy plan calls for ensuring no rivals develop. No rivals. The US isn't going to share power. It's not going to accept a multipolar world. It is the US runs everything, or it will destroy everything in the process, and nobody will have anything. That is where the US is right now geopolitically. Should India and China stand firm, the US imposed sanctions and tariffs would do short-term damage to both India and China, but also to the US itself. Washington's significant escalation in terms of sweeping sanctions and tariffs potentially accelerates the long-term trend toward a multipolar economic order. The intermediate challenge to nations like India and China being cut off from the US dollar and Western markets forces a rapid diversification of trade and financial settlement systems, which has already been ongoing since the inception of BRICS. This additional US strategic pressure, intended to inflict shorter-term pain on Russia, inadvertently incentivizes and hastens the development of non-Western alternatives, including to the US dollar and US-dominated payment systems. The battle for Ukraine's fortress belt is thus a microcosm of the larger US proxy war in Ukraine against Russia, a slow, grinding military operation that dictates massive geopolitical consequences. The outcome of this battle will likely cement the overall outcome of the Ukraine conflict itself. More broadly, the US response, pivoting from military containment to economic warfare against Russia's global partners, confirms that this conflict has always been just one part of a much larger US strategy towards the ultimate aim of eliminating rivals and maintaining primacy worldwide. So you can see, this isn't just about Ukraine and Russia. It is a US proxy war against Russia, and it isn't just about the US versus Russia. It is just one part of a larger strategy to control the entire planet, including especially focus on isolating and then doing all of this to China next. And it includes taking measures that hurt everybody. When you start talking about sanctions on India, on China, when you start talking about the international energy markets and taking Russia, which is a huge part of those markets, you're trying to take them out of those markets, now you're starting to hurt everybody, everywhere. This is U.S. foreign policy. This is at the crux of it. The coming months will be pivotal, not just in terms of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, but in terms of the global order that emerges as part of the larger conflict the U.S. is fighting against, not just Russia, but the entire multipolar world. It's not just a war against Russia. It is a war against China. It is a war against India. It is a war against other BRICS members. It is a war against every single nation that is not already subordinated to the United States itself. That is what you have to remember while looking at the battlefield in Ukraine. This is not just Russia fighting for Russian interests. This is the very front line of this wider battle between US primacy and global multipolarism. That is the article. That is where I will end this video. I will try to get caught up with all of my work. I will try to get back to doing at least 2 videos a week. I continue posting on X and on Telegram, and also posts on YouTube. And if you don't know where to find those, I will show you really quick right now. You go to my channel, The New Atlas, and right here you hit posts, and it will show you all of the posts that I have been posting over the last week, 2 weeks. The Queen of Thailand, Queen Sirikit, she was 93. She passed away recently. I sent my condolences and thoughts to the Thai people. As I explained in this post to Westerners, the Thai monarchy might seem like a strange thing. Seeing Thai people revere it may seem strange to Westerners, but you have to understand that the Thai monarchy is not to be compared to a Western monarchy. The Western concept of monarchy, it is its own institution spanning centuries. It is what has united Thai people for centuries. It is what has kept Thailand free for centuries. It is the only country in Southeast Asia that was never dominated by Western empire. And even to this day, it serves as a unifying force in Thai society, preventing it from even now succumbing to US primacy. So very important. Her husband was King Rama IX. He passed away several years ago. His son, King Rama X, is now the king and continues everything that the monarchy has been doing for centuries. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for all the places you can find and follow my work. Like I said, all my videos are posted on X, Telegram, YouTube, Rumble. I also post regular posts day to day on all of these platforms as well. In the video description under this video, you will also see all of the links that I referenced in this article, as well as the link to the article itself. Check all of that out. And there are also ways you can help support my work listed in the video description below. I do not monetize any of my social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them. If you're looking at on Telegram and you see some cryptocurrency thing, please don't click on it. I mean, unless you really want to, please don't click on it. It has nothing to do with me or supporting my channel. If you do want to help support my channel, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also through Patreon. To everyone who has been helping out, whether it's a one-time donation or donations month to month, or if you have no extra resources to spare and you're just helping share my work with others, you're sending kind comments or news tips to me, all of that greatly helps. All of that together is what makes this work possible. So thank you very much. And as always, thank you for watching.